This is kofta, the Egyptian version of the meatball, even though, as you might have noticed, it isn't really a ball. Usually it's grilled over charcoal, but in case the weather's not good outside or you just don't feel like firing up the grill, I'll show you how to cook it in a regular oven, but with flavor that is very similar to the charcoal grilled. Also, I'll be showing you how to make simple creamy tahini salad to go with it, so stay tuned for that. For this recipe I used a pound of ground beef. As you can see, it's not too lean, as fat adds flavor and juiciness to the kofta. However, this beef was not ground to my liking. It was coarse. Kofta is usually made with finely ground beef. It's better to ask the butcher to finely ground it for you, or if you have a meat grinder at home, you can do it yourself. Since I don't have one at home, I put the meat in a food processor and pulsed it a few times. Be careful not to overprocess it, otherwise the meatball may become too tough or compacted after cooking. As for any kofta, a lot of onion is usually added. I added one medium-sized onion and also added a medium-sized tomato. This isn't traditional, but in my opinion, tomato gives it a nice flavor. If you want it to be a little bit spicy, you can add a hot pepper, but that's optional. I let the food processor do its job on them, but before adding them to the meat, I squeezed out the excess water from the grated onion and tomatoes, because it can make the meatball break apart in the oven. And by the way, this water can be used as a marinade for barbecue meat. Usually kofta is made with lamb meat or mutton. I used beef instead, but I gave it a lamb flavor by grating a small piece of lamb fat with it. I froze it beforehand to make it easier to grate. For this entire pound of beef, I used only 50 grams of lamb fat, but you can use even less if you prefer. If you don't know where to find it or simply don't like using it, just don't. I do recommend it, however, because it not only adds flavor but also helps keep the kofta juicy and prevents it from drying out too much while cooking. For the seasoning, I added a teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of black pepper, and half a teaspoon of Middle Eastern 7 spices. You'll find that at any Middle Eastern store. To make the meatball more tender and lighter, I used the ingredient that makes cake fluffy and light, half a teaspoon of baking powder. Then I mixed everything together until evenly combined. After that, I used a honing steel to mold the koftas into shape, and to add that little hole through the kofta. If you are planning to use skewers, do that. And if the beef starts to get sticky, just wet your palm with the juices you squeezed out of the onions and tomatoes. It'll make it easier to handle. When making the kofta pieces, beware that it will shrink while cooking, so remember to make it a little bigger than how you like your kofta to be. After shaping all the kofta pieces, I let it sit in the fridge for half an hour. Then I placed them in a preheated oven at 200 degrees Celsius, that's about 400 Fahrenheit. Turn on both the top and bottom heat if possible, or just the bottom heat. The two things I love to serve these koftas with are French fries and tahini salad. I fried a batch of French fries and started working on the tahini. I used half a cup of tahini, reached the desired consistency by gradually adding hot water and whisking. Once it became of that consistency, I crushed 2 garlic cloves onto it. I also squeezed 2 teaspoons of lemon juice and gave it a good whisk. Then, I seasoned it. I started with half a teaspoon of salt, followed by a quarter teaspoon of black pepper, cumin, coriander, and ground chili pepper. Then I whisked, tasted for seasoning, and adjusted accordingly. Into that, I mixed a bit of parsley and olive oil. I also added a little more parsley and olive oil on top for garnish. Now back to the kofta. When it started to brown on the outside, I took it out of the oven. It took about half an hour in there. As you can see, the fats melted and created this flavorful yet very fattening sauce in the pan. This serves two purposes. I poured it over the kofta to make it juicier and more flavorful. Second, I placed a little piece of lit charcoal on it. The smoky aroma coming out of it was amazing. I covered the dish to allow the kofta to absorb the smoky flavor from the charcoal. If your kofta doesn't produce this much sauce, place the charcoal on a tablespoon of butter and do the same thing. After 5 minutes, I transferred the kofta over some parsley to serve. The best way for me to enjoy this dish is by taking half a loaf of Egyptian bread. You can use pita if that's the only thing you have, then stuffing it with parsley and French fries, placing the kofta on top, and drizzling some tahini salad. And of course, never forget that extra tahini salad for dipping. This tasted exquisite, and it's one of my favorite dishes. Try it out and let me know what you think. And if you're still watching, thank you so much for watching till the end.